Tula hem och tula val, tula långt åt mossen. Golf fick jag när jag kom hem, golf fick jag i påsen. Mjölken var på gul och blå, osten såg jag lite å, smöret smakte jag aldrig.
I want to tell you a story about consequence, a story about how every action carries a consequence, and every consequence triggers the next, and the next, and the next, and the next, and the next, leading us to the only possible conclusion. But let's start at the very beginning.
In the beginning, there was ice, and there was fire. A burning ember met with a shard of ice, and formed a pool of water. In the pool of water, there was movement. From the pool of water emerged a head, shoulders, arms, and legs. Out from the pool of water stepped Ymir, the first of the frost giants. Yay! I'll do one more. Yep. In the beginning, there was nothing. Ginnungagap, the vast, empty expanse of nothing. There was fire, and there was ice. Can you shoot me just walking off into the distance? Yeah. And then I'll turn around and walk back again. Okay.
In the beginning there was Ginnungagap, the great nothingness, the vast emptiness, the place of waiting, the place of possibility, holding its breath, still and silent until a burning ember, caught on the winds of change, blew into Ginnungagap, and there met with a shard of ice. The ice melted and formed a pool of water. In that pool of water there was a heartbeat, steady and strong. In the pool of water there was movement. Out of the pool of water emerged a head, shoulders, arms and legs, and out from the pool of water stepped Ymir, the first of the frost giants.
When Ymir slept, one leg fathered a son against the other leg. When Ymir slept, 7-headed trolls crawled out from in between his toes. When Ymir slept, giants grew in the sweat of his armpits. When Ymir slept, there was movement in the pool of water again, and this time out stepped a cow. The giant and the trolls drank the milk from the cow, and when the cow was thirsty, she licked the ice. She licked and she licked, enjoying the taste of the salt. She licked and she licked until she uncovered hair, an ear. She licked some more, a neck, a face. She licked and she licked until out from the ice, arms, legs, feet.
Out from the ice stepped Buri. And this is where the story really begins, because Buri had a son who had 3 sons with a giantess. Odin, Ville, and Vi, the first of the gods. They were tall and strong and handsome and good. They looked at Ymir, the first of the frost giants, and they saw nothing in his heart but ice and cruelty. They knew that he must go. They raised their swords up high and plunged them deep into Ymir's flesh. Ymir crashed to the ground. Odin, Vile and V sliced off the hairs from his chest, cast the hairs out across Ginnunga Gap, and where they landed sprouted oak, elm, beech, birch, pine, sycamore, willow. They took his skull, threw it up high, and it formed the sky. They cut off his arms and legs, and they became the mountain ranges. His flesh became the earth. His crushed-up bones became the stars. They sliced his veins, and the blood flowed into becks, rivers, and great oceans. The 9 worlds were created. There was the world of ice, the world of fire, the world of the dead, the world of the dwarves, the world of the elves, the world of the men, the world of the Vanir, the world of the giants and the trolls, and the world of the gods. In the centre of these 9 worlds stood Yggdrasil, the great ash tree. The life force of the 9 worlds flowed up and down its trunk, its bark like veins. Its roots reached deep down into the underworlds, and its branches held up the heavens. A dragon gnawed the roots of the tree. An eagle sat in the highest branches, and a squirrel scampered up and down the trunk, passing curses between the dragon and the eagle. Yggdrasil was the tree that was. Yggdrasil was the tree that always would be. Yggdrasil was the tree that would be until the world was no more. Asgard was built, the land of the gods.
Asgard was a good place, full of fertile fields and golden meadows and apple orchards and great feasting halls. Odin, tall and strong and good and handsome, the oldest of the gods, became the leader of the gods, the ruler of Asgard. He and his wife Frigg had 2 sons, twins. The firstborn was pale and weak, sickly and blind. They called him Hod. The secondborn was strong and handsome and born with a smile on his chubby little cheeks. They called him Baldr. Odin watched his 2 sons grow up, Hod and Baldr and Baldr and Hod, and Baldr was his pride and joy. Everywhere he went, Baldr spread love and happiness. He was kind and sweet and funny and loving. He became known as Baldr, the god of light. Asgard was a good place. Asgard was a beautiful place. Asgard was good, and Asgard was beautiful, and Asgard was perfect. Asgard was not perfect. You see, Asgard was boring. Asgard was dull. Nothing ever happened in Asgard. The gods and goddesses knew that something was missing. And Odin knew that he was the only one who could find this missing thing. And so he set off on a journey.
Odin travelled to the land of the giants. It was a bare and barren land, with burnt-down trees and bones scattered across the ground. The fierce sun beat down on his bare back as he walked. He stopped when he came to a gushing river, the river of dreams. On the other side, a dangerous place, wild and unmanaged, a place of movement and colour and revolution and rebellion, a place of chaos. Odin saw then, on the other side of the river, a wolf with bright, fiery eyes, hunched down, staring at him. Then the wolf shifted. It grew great wings and became an eagle, flying up, soaring in circles overhead. And then it shrank and flew down, and a tiny fly buzzed around Odin, round and round, and then it became a salmon that leapt up and splashed into the river. Odin had no idea what this was, but it had made his heart race. He plunged his hand into the icy cold water, and like a bear catching its prey, pulled out the fish. It triple somersaulted from his hand, and on the ground landed a boy. A boy with bright eyes, short red hair and freckles across his face.
And the boy said, "Feed me and I will live. Water me and I will die. What am I?"
"You are fire," said Odin. The boy stuck forward a hand and said, "Loki, fastest shapeshifter in the north." A hare poked its head out of a nearby burrow, and quick as a flash, Loki grabbed the creature, said, "Dinner?" and then snapped its neck. Before long they'd built a fire and were roasting the meat. Night began to fall. Loki gazed up and said, "By night they come without being fetched. By day they are gone without being stolen." "Easy," said Odin. "Stars." "Yes," said Loki, "but what else?" "By night they come without being fetched. By day they are gone without being stolen." "Well, come on." "Dreams, of course. Dreams and nightmares." For the first time in a long time, Odin found himself laughing. "I like you, Loki. You have something about you. Come back with me to Asgard. We'll be like brothers, you and I. We'll never accept a favour or a drink unless it's offered to the two of us." With his knife he cut his palm. The blood trickled. Loki's eyes gleamed. He took the knife, and under the light of the full moon, their hands and their blood joined. The next day, Odin returned to Asgard with Loki by his side. All of the gods and goddesses gathered in the great hall to see who this strange new stranger might be. They stared at this red-headed creature, and Odin introduced Loki to all of them. "My lovely wife, Frigg," he said. "God of thunder, Thor, you two will be good friends. Idun, the goddess of youth. Bragi, god of poetry. Freya, goddess of fertility." And he did not stop until the crowd fell silent. The gods parted, and into the hall stepped a god whose face shone like a summer's day. And Odin said, "Loki, I want you to meet my son. My most beloved son, the most loved of all the gods, Baldr, the god of light." Baldr's eyes met Loki's eyes. Light met dark, and dark met light. In that moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled. Baldr smiled, and Loki's eyes glinted.
That was the night that Baldr's nightmares began. Come, come, do what night rise, do what night rise, don't come
Loki settled well into Asgard. It wasn't long before he had a beautiful wife and a group of devoted disciples who followed him everywhere he went, like little puppy dogs after their mother. Since Loki had arrived in Asgard, things had changed. Asgard had become interesting. Since Loki had arrived, things had begun to happen. Well, okay, I'll admit, there might have been a little bit of trouble now and then. There was the time when Sif woke up to find that her beautiful golden locks had been shaved off in the night and now she was as bald as the moon. And then there was the time when Idun was lured away into the nest of a giant eagle. And without her golden apples of youth, the gods and goddesses became old and grey and crooked. And then there was the time when the sun and the moon were very nearly lost to a frost giant in a dodgy deal. And then there was the time when Thor woke up one morning to find that his precious thunderbolt hammer, the hammer that protected the whole of Asgard, was gone, vanished, disappeared without a trace. Loki, who was always the first to help, borrowed Freya's falcon-feathered cloak and flew off in search of the hammer. Strangely, he seemed to know exactly where to go. Into the land of the giants he flew, and landed at the throne of the king of the giants. He had the nose and ears of an old boxer, hairy hands like forested spades, teeth rotten and stained with blood. "Tell them this," he said. "I'll give back the hammer if I get Freya for my wife." Back in Asgard, Loki shared the news. All eyes turned to Freya, and her face turned the colour of a pickled beetroot. The veins on her neck bulged and her necklace snapped, the beads spilling across the floor. "I think we'll need another plan," said Loki. The gods looked at each other and shrugged. "I know. What we need is someone really brave and really strong, with incredibly good looks." Thor stepped forward. "Well then, I'm the god for the job," he said. "Great," said Loki. "You will be a stunning bride." And before Thor could back down, the tailors were summoned, and they took Thor's measurements. Across his broad chest, his huge feet, his wrists. They were given the finest white cloth to work with. Finally, the white wedding dress was ready. A shining, long brunette wig was made. The laughing goddesses fetched their makeup. Thor was given eyeliner and bright red lipstick and pink cheeks and earrings and bracelets. His chest was waxed, his arms and legs were shaved, and he was squeezed into a pair of high heels. Loki was having the best time. "I'll be your bridesmaid," he said. He put on a wig of long red plaits and a little purple dress. Thor was fuming with fury, but there was no going back now. Thor and Loki climbed into Thor's carriage, and pulled by 2 goats, they thundered through the sky to the land of the giants. A great wedding feast had been prepared in the giants' hall. The king of the giants sat in his throne, and his beautiful bride and her bridesmaid were brought in to sit on either side of him. Thor was starving. The food looked good. He didn't wait. He grabbed a salmon and ate the whole thing in one go. And then a roasted hare, and then a whole barbecued pig, tearing off the legs, sucking out the trotters, crunching on the ribs, and then licking his fingers. The king of the giants watched in astonishment. He turned to the bridesmaid. "Well, she's got quite an appetite." "She's been so excited about marrying you, she's not eaten for a week," said Loki. The king then watched as the bride picked up a barrel of beer, downed the whole thing in one go, and then let out an almighty belch. "She can certainly drink too." "She's been so excited about marrying you, she's not drunk a drop for a week." A woman who could eat. A woman who could drink. This was such a turn-on for the king. He pulled his bride towards him, ripped off her veil, and gazed lustily into her bright red, bulging eyes. "Why are her eyes so red?" "She's been so excited about marrying you, she's not slept for a week." "Well then, she must be ready for bed. And so am I. Let's get married." First, the wedding gifts," said the bridesmaid. The king gave his order, and 2 giants came running over, carrying an ornate box. Thor pulled open the box, and inside, gleaming, smooth and shining, standing to attention, was his hammer. His chest swelled, and the dress ripped. He kicked off his heels, he raised his hammer high, and any giants that didn't manage to escape in time soon had their heads rolling across the floor like the beads of a necklace. Back in Asgard, it didn't take too long for Thor to regain his alpha male status. Thor had his hammer back, and all was well. But the brunette wig and the high heels disappeared. And sometimes a goddess would find that her full-length mirror had gone missing, and that Thor had locked himself into his room. But no one dared say a word. There might have been more trouble in Asgard than before, but Loki made sure there were always presents to make up for the mischief. Sif was given new golden locks, pure gold, spun by the dwarves. Idun was given a glittering bracelet. Odin was given an 8-legged horse. There were jewels and gems and coins and weapons, more riches than the gods had ever dreamed of. And they all agreed that life in Asgard had never been better.
In Baldr's nightmare, the winds howl wild and savage. In Baldr's nightmare, a snake appears, as wide as the rivers, as tall as the pine trees, breathing poisonous fumes into the air. In Baldr's nightmare, there is a woman, a giant woman with rotting flesh that squirms with maggots, crushing all those children not fast enough to escape her giant feet. In Baldr's nightmare, a huge wolf opens its jaws wide and swallows the sun. The stars are ripped from the sky. The rivers run red. The earth heaves with sickness. Baldr tries to help, but is paralyzed. Baldr's nightmares came every night now, worse than ever. Baldr's mother, Frigg, begged her husband Odin to go to the oracle, please, have these dreams interpreted. And with a heavy heart, knowing the news would not be good, Odin journeyed. He rode his 8-legged horse over the burning rainbow bridge, through the land of the giants and the dwarves, through the underworlds he rode. He did not stop until he passed the great hall of the dead. And here he saw that the doors were open wide. He peered inside and saw a great table had been laid, a huge feast had been prepared. And there was a throne, a golden throne at the head of the table, empty. "You look like you're waiting for an honourable guest. Who are you expecting?" And a voice came from nowhere and everywhere at the same time, a voice that said, "An honourable guest indeed, the best we could have hoped for." Odin shuddered and rode on.
When Odin returned to Asgard, his face was ashen white and his eyes were bloodshot. All the gods gathered to hear his news. "The oracle has told me that my son, my beloved son, our beloved god of light, Baldr, will soon have his life cut short. We may be gods, but we have no power to change this fate. Yet, what would we be if we did not try? These 3 beasts that hold Baldr's dreams, they are somewhere in the 9 worlds. We must find them. We must protect Baldr." The gods listened in silence as Odin spoke. And then Odin's gaze turned to Loki. "There is a rumour, Loki, that you have been keeping a secret from us. That you have fathered children with a giant." Loki leapt up. "Not a secret exactly. You just never asked. But it's true. I have 3 beautiful children. I have a son who is both clever and strong. His name is Fenrir, a dangerous wolf. And I have a daughter. Her name is Hel, and she is loyal and brave. She is an ugly whore. And finally, I have a child who is neither a son nor a daughter, but a wondrous creature who goes by the name Jormungand, a slithering serpent. Leave my children alone, and we will leave you alone, Odin. You brought a little fire into your home, now let it keep you warm. Bring fire into your home and it will burn your house down. Find these creatures. My son will be safe." That night they returned to Asgard with Loki's 3 children. Baldr was brought into the hall so he could see them. First came the snake, hissing and spitting, and Baldr said, "Yes, that's the one, smaller, but that's the one from my dreams." And so Odin snatched the snake, and he flung it out of Asgard and into the oceans. Next came the woman. No, the girl. Just a girl with rotting flesh. And Baldr said, "Yes, she's the one, again smaller, but she's the one from my dreams." And so Odin grabbed her by the hair and hurled her out of Asgard. And she landed deep down in the underworlds. Finally, they brought in the wolf, snarling and snapping on the end of a chain. Someone from the crowd shouted, "Kill it!" But Odin said, "No, this is sacred ground. It will not be killed, but take it away. Bind it down with chains so it can never escape." That night, Loki's dark thoughts surged and swelled and churned, and as they did, his 3 children grew. Out there in the oceans, Jormungand the snake grew so long that he encircled the 9 worlds. He did not stop growing until he had tucked his tail into his mouth. Deep down in the underworlds, Hell had grown so great that they called her their queen. Fenrir the wolf had snapped through every rope and cage until the only chains that could hold him down were those made with magic by the dwarves.
Frigg, Baldr's mother, cradled her son as the gods and goddesses, even the dwarves and the giants, sat around and wept. Loki's children were banished now, but it made no difference. Baldr's nightmares came worse than ever before. The nights were filled with the sounds of him screaming and thrashing. Odin said there was nothing more they could do now. They must await his fate. But Frigg looked at her son, her beautiful boy, and said no. She lay him carefully down on the ground. "I will not have my son taken from me," she said. And she stepped out into the 9 worlds. And there, everything that she met, every stick, every stone, every berry, every bone, every drop of water in the sea, every giant, every bee, every knife, every axe, every sword, every spear, every mallet, every mountain, every demon, every deer, she asked them all to promise not to hurt her son. And they all promised.
When Frigg returned to Asgard, she was delighted to share the good news. Everything had promised not to hurt Baldr, and now he would be safe. When Baldr heard the news, he was filled with a new life force. He slowly got to his feet, looked at the crowd and said, "Well, come on, let's try it. Somebody throw something at me." The crowd all shuffled awkwardly. And then a small boy, picked up a tiny pebble and tentatively threw it at Baldr's head, and it bounced off his forehead onto the ground, and Baldr said, "I didn't feel a thing." Another boy picked up a bigger stone, and then a girl picked up a stick, and they threw them at Baldr, and they bounced off. And the children laughed, and then more children joined in, and then the gods and goddesses joined in as well, everyone throwing sticks and stones at Baldr. And then Loki picked up a spear. He hurled it at Baldr, and it bounced off his chest onto the ground, and Baldr said, "I didn't feel a thing. I'm invincible." Loki skulked into the shadows of the tree.
Out from the shadows of the trees stepped an old woman. She sat herself down beside Frigg, who was watching with joy in her heart the joy of her son. And the old woman said, "How did you do it then?" "It was easy," said Frigg. "All I had to do was ask everything to promise not to hurt him." "And everything agreed?" "Everything," said Frigg. "Well, I'll let you in on a secret. Almost everything. It was the end of the day, and I was exhausted. I saw then that I'd missed a tiny sprig of mistletoe high up in the trees. I was too tired to climb the tree. I thought to myself, how could something so small and soft ever hurt my son? I let it be. The old woman smiled then, her eyes glinted, and she returned back to the shadows of the trees. It wasn't long before Loki held that very same sprig of mistletoe in his hand. With a knife he sharpened it, with wire he attached it to the end of an arrow, and then Loki found Hod, Baldr's blind brother. My friend, standing here all alone, not joining in the game, why ever not? I have nothing to throw. Even if I did, I wouldn't be able to see where to aim. Oh, I'm sure your brother would want you to join in. I tell you what, I will help you. And he gave Hod the bow. He helped Hod to fix the arrow to the string. He helped Hod to pull the string taut, to aim the arrow, and Hod released. The arrow sliced through the air, through the crowd, through skin and sinew and flesh. It pierced Baldr's heart. Baldr looked down, astonished to see red spreading like a lake across his chest, and the crowd stepped back in horror. And Baldr looked up one last time. He smiled at his mother, and then the god of light fell to the ground.
Tu la hem og tu la val, tu la langt åt mossen.
Grief-stricken, the gods carried Baldr's body down to the sea. His boat was waiting. They built a funeral pyre beneath the mast. They placed Baldr's body onto the wood. They piled treasures around him. And then they pushed that boat, heavy with sorrow, out across the waves. Odin lit an arrow. They watched the burning boat make its way to the horizon, and then down, deep down, to that place where the dead wait for their time to come again.
Loki wasn't hanging around. He fled out into the dark night. He made his way north, as quiet and agile as a fox. As dawn broke, Loki found a small hut on the top of a hill. It was empty, apart from a table with a long piece of twine coiled up like a snake. There were windows on every side to keep watch. It was the perfect place to hide. Outside the hut were rocks and a small river. Loki built a fire and sat by the river, playing with the twine in his hands. He began to loop and knot, and loop and knot and knot and loop and knot, and as he did, he wondered, if I were to try to catch myself, how would I do it? Would it even be possible? Then he heard voices. Odin, leading a small army of gods and goddesses, was coming up the hill. They'd seen him. But by the time they arrived, the fire was stamped out. The hut was empty. Odin looked in the river and saw a flash of pink. It's him, there, in the river, that salmon. And so they plunged their hands into the cold water, but the salmon slipped past them. And then Odin looked at the fire and saw there was a strange grid shape in the embers. He pulled out the twine. In Odin's hands he held the world's very first net. They put the net into the water, but it floated. So they attached stones and it sank. They pulled it slowly through the water towards the rocks, and the salmon was trapped. The salmon leapt out of the water, but Odin's hand, like the great paw of a bear, caught him. Loki, held tightly by the gods, returned to his boyish form. His eyes glittered and gleamed. They bound his arms before he could change again. "Oh, it's good to see you all enjoying yourselves out here. It looks like you finally realised you're better off without your beloved god of light, after all. I knew you'd come and thank me for it in the end." Odin said, "Your words are not welcome, Loki, and neither are you." Odin, watching Loki closely, took a drink of water from his horn. "I want a drink," said Loki. Odin laughed. "Oh, have you forgotten your promise? That night, under the moon, when we shook our blooded hands and became brothers, you promised that neither of us would accept a favour or a drink unless it was offered to the two of us. Why, you seem to have a drink, so it can only be right, according to your very own promise, that you bring me one too." The gods began to shout and draw their swords, but Odin said, "Put down your swords. He's right. I made a promise. Bring him a drink." Frigg glared at her husband. "He killed our son. We all know it was him. And now you offer him a drink? What kind of a husband are you? And what kind of a wife are you?" said Loki. "Married to Odin, and yet everyone here knows that whenever you get the chance you jump straight into bed with his two brothers Vile and Vi both at the same time." "Stop that!" shouted Freya. Loki turned to Freya. "And you, goddess of beauty, such a lovely necklace. Was it the elves or the maggots you shagged to get your hands on it?" Odin said, "Loki, that's enough. You've crossed the line." No, there was no line. Well, until I came along, that is. Oh dear Odin, ruler of the gods. The world looks to you for strength and leadership, but you offer nothing but cowardice and indecision. Your time has come, Odin. All of you. The cracks in this perfect world are growing and will swallow you all. You brought all this on, Odin. Have you forgotten how it was you who came to find me? I was waiting. I knew you'd come. I knew you'd see there was something missing in your dull, perfect world. And I was right. There's always something missing. I'm the part of the bird that's not in the sky. I can swim in the ocean and yet remain dry. I'm not your brother, but your shadow, Odin, and I always will be." Loki was dragged into a nearby cave. He was bound to a jagged rock with the intestines of a wolf that solidified like metal as soon as they touched his bare skin. They hung a snake over his head and left. Loki, shapeshifter, mischief maker, fire starter, trouble chaser, scoundrel, catalyst, greatest trickster of them all, was caught.
I'd like to be able to say that Loki escaped, or that the gods changed their minds, and that somehow Baldr returned from the land of the dead. But we all know that none of that's the case. In that world, just like in this world, every action carries a consequence, and every consequence triggers the next, and 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 the next. leading us to the only possible conclusion.
There he lies, bound to that rock in that dark, damp cave, a snake poised above his head. A snake with a drop of venom slowly rolling down its tongue. If that venom falls, it will hit Loki's face. And if it hits his face, it's going to hurt. Really hurt. And so Loki's wife will come, and if she does, she'll hold a bowl, and when the drop of poison falls, she'll catch it. And the next drop, and the next, and the next. But of course, eventually that bowl is going to fill. And when it can hold no more, she'll have no choice but to go and empty it. And when she does, the next drop of poison will fall, and with nothing to catch it, it will splash into Loki's eye. And if it does, it will burn like acid. And Loki will scream. His scream will be heard across the 9 worlds, and if it does, maybe it will send shivers down the spines of the gods. Loki's scream will unleash the greatest powers, the darkest forces, the demons and the monsters. It will set into motion a domino effect that once started can't be stopped. The earth will split, all the way down to the underworlds. All bonds will be broken. The dead will be set free and ooze like pale pus from the wounds of hell. The chains that bind Fenrir the wolf will break, and he will be free. The chains that bind Loki will break, and he will step out from that cave. And if that happens, the watchman over Asgard will see an army of ghouls and ghosts and trolls and giants approaching. He will raise his horn high and blow with all his might. The army of gods, led by Odin, will gather. And if that happens, well then, from the north, across the raging seas, will come a ship, made of the clippings of toenails and fingernails of the dead, manned by a crew of ghosts. A boy, no, a man now. A man with bright glinting eyes and red hair will stand at the helm, his eyes blazing, hungry for a new game. And if that happens, then the armies will clash. Every corner of the 9 worlds will become a bloody battlefield. Sword will meet flesh, blade will meet bone. Severed heads of trolls will roll across the ground. Frost giants will crush men to death with their bare hands. Blood from both sides will flow into a red river. By then, many won't even know which side they're fighting on or what they're fighting for. And if that happens, then watching all of this, there will be a young girl and a young boy. They'll take each other by the hand and they'll run. They'll run until they reach Yggdrasil, the great ash tree. They'll find a hole in the trunk and they'll squeeze through and hide inside. And then from the oceans will come the snake, huge now. It will slither across the ground, breathing fumes of poison. Birds will drop dead from the sky and hit the ground with a sickening thud. And then the giant woman, with rotting flesh that squirms with maggots. She'll crush the screaming children not fast enough to escape her giant feet. And then will come the huge wolf, wild-eyed and hungry. He will feast on flesh. The sea will rise over the mountains. The stars will be torn from the skies. The earth will heave with sickness. Odin will keep fighting, trying to hold back what he knows cannot be held back, fighting for a different ending. But eventually, Odin will be swallowed by the wolf. And then Frigg will be crushed by the giant woman. And those not killed by the wolf or the woman will be poisoned by the fumes of the snake. And Loki? He'll be there. Of course he'll be there, watching it all and laughing because to him it's nothing but a game. Ragnarok will not stop until the 9 worlds are destroyed. and then the wolf will swallow the sun. There will be darkness and silence. Yggdrasil will creak, crack, and crash to the ground. But we're not there yet. Loki is still bound to that rock, and the drop of venom is about to fall. And when it does...
There is movement in the fallen trunk of the ash tree. Out step a boy and a girl. The sun, a new sun, rises over the seas, making the boy and girl blink in the brightness. A spider weaves a web across the fallen branches. A tiny yellow flower emerges from the mud. A bird flies across the sky with a twig in its beak. Seeds sprout in the fields. The rivers run clear. The birds sing. The new world is a good place. The world is a beautiful place. The world is a good and beautiful place. The world is perfect. The world is nearly perfect. Something is missing.
Start again. Mjölken var på gul och blå. Osten såg jag lite och smöret smakade jag aldrig. Oh my god. my throat is gone.
Tula hem och tula vall, tula långt åt mossen. Kol fick jag när jag kom hem, kol fick jag i påsen. Mjölken var på gul och blå, osten såg jag lite och smöret smakade jag aldrig.